Guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I want to share an orchid that's compact, easy to grow, literally has hundreds of flowers, and is really fragrant, and that is my Oncidium Twinkle. So this one is blooming for me right now, so I'm happy to share it with you guys. I'm going to share how I care for it here in my apartment in New York City, and just what I've learned along the way in growing them. I find them super cute. Every time they bloom, I get really excited because they bloom really nicely for me once a year. They bloom multiple times a year, but they give me a big show once a year. And I want to show you how I care for it. So let's jump right in. So the Oncidium Twinkle is a hybrid between the Oncidium chirophorum and the Oncidium sotoanum. And it is a super vigorous. I've had this orchid for about 3 years. It's probably quadrupled in size since I got it. So it grows really nicely, really easily. I think I had like 2 or 3 bulbs when I first received it. So it's super vigorous. I think this is a really good plant for beginners, beginner orchid growers, if you want to branch off from Phalaenopsis, just given how vigorous it is. It shares a parent with the Shari baby. I believe the sotoanum is in the Shari baby, so the fragrance smells a little bit similar to the Shari baby, and the Shari baby smells like chocolate. Check out this video here if you want to see more about the Shari baby, which is another very easy to grow orchid. As I said, this orchid is super vigorous. This has well over 100 flowers. It's not even done blooming, but the hardest part with this orchid is waiting for all of the blooms to come in because the spikes, they take months. So this has been working on its spikes for a really long time. So I couldn't wait to see it. I probably have 250 flowers that are going to be opening up here, but the spikes take forever to open. They literally could take you up to 6 months from when you first see the spike till when the flower opens up. But when they open up, it's so beautiful. It's so worth it. It's a really nice orchid. So this orchid blooms in the winter for me. So generally around this time of year, I start seeing the spikes early on in the fall. They take forever, but when they open up, it's super cute. They look like little kernels of popcorn. It's called the Twinkle, probably because it looks like a little star. It has like some yellow in the middle, but it blooms in the winter for me, and it gives me a really nice show. When this fully opens up, it's a massive show. It's gorgeous, but it does bloom twice a year for me. So the big show is in the winter, but in the summer and spring, sometimes I get 1 or 2 spikes. So I get like a little mini show, but the biggest blooming for me is in the winter. In terms of watering this orchid, I water it as it approaches dryness. I have it in 100% sphagnum moss, and I want to get it close to being dry, but not quite fully dry. I don't want it to dry for too long if it does get dry, but this orchid is prone to rot. So I used to grow some of mine in semi-hydro, and I noticed some of them declining, and some of the bulbs died off, and I came to the conclusion that it was just too moist of an environment in my conditions. So I moved everything over to sphagnum moss where I could control the moisture a little bit more. So with this orchid, I like to water it thoroughly, and then I let it almost get fully dry and then water it again. The issue with semi-hydro was that it was too humid, I think. And then that's why I noticed some of them declining. So I moved them into sphagnum moss. So this orchid is prone to rot. So you want to be careful and mindful about that. Some people also mount these. I'm not a fan of that because I don't want to constantly water them every single day. So that's why I have it in sphagnum moss. But you could play around with different methods. You could put it in bark and water more frequently, or put it in bark and sphagnum moss. Bark will promote more aeration, which is great for this orchid. You don't want it to rot. You don't want to overwater and keep it very soggy wet all the time. Just let it get a little bit almost dry is what I'd say. This is a warm growing orchid, so I would say that the temperatures need to be above 60, 65 degrees. I grow this indoors under grow lights, and then if you keep it over 60, 65 degrees, it'll be fine. I would say the upper limit for this orchid is about 90, 95 degrees. I would classify this as a warm grower, and it does well in my indoor conditions. If you're comfortable in the environment, the plant should be comfortable in its environment as well for this one. Light. So in terms of light, I give this orchid moderate light. You could give it bright light, but just be careful that the leaves will burn if you give it Cattleya level light. So that's something that I've learned along the way, and I'm a little bit more careful with this just because I grew it next to my Cattleyas in very, very bright light, and it bleached a lot of the leaves and a lot of them fell off. So moderate light is your best bet with this orchid. And it grows really nicely. You might be able to get away with growing it in low light, but I'd say maybe just a little bit more than what your Phalaenopsis gets, and that's fine. If you're growing it on a window, I would put it on an east-facing window. If you're growing it on a south-facing window, make sure that it's filtered light, very filtered, so it's not getting so it's not getting too much, and you could tell by the leaves. So you could play around with it and monitor how the leaves are looking, and maybe pull it back from your window if you see that the leaves are too scorched, but the plant will talk to you and let you know if it's happy. I fertilize this just like my other orchids. You could follow the instructions on the package generally, but in the summer I give it about 300 parts per million of MSU fertilizer, and in the winter I throttle that back and either don't give it fertilizer some weeks, and other weeks about 125 parts per million of fertilizer, and I typically use MSU fertilizer. Okay, what I really like about this orchid is the fragrance. So I love it. It smells like vanilla, or like vanilla ice cream. It's really nice. You could typically smell it in the beginning of the day. You don't smell it at night. Towards the evening, it starts smelling grassy, which is interesting. She's waking up. It could smell grassy later on in the day, which is interesting. Oh, look who woke up. Don't eat it. Don't eat my plant. She's gonna want to eat this one. So it could smell a little bit grassy in the evening, so that's something to keep in mind as well. It's really pleasant, really nice. It reminds me a little bit of the Shari Baby, and as I mentioned, it has one of the same parents, the Oncidium sotoanum, which is a parent to the Shari Baby. It is like the sotoanum is 25% of the Shari Baby, which makes sense why the fragrance smells so similar. Zoe's here purring now. Worthy. So there's a couple of things that I learned about growing this orchid, which I wanted to share. There's some precautions that you have to take. The biggest one was the light that I realized. If you give this orchid too much bright light, the leaves will fall off and bleach. So you have to be mindful of that. But that's easy to find. You just put it in the light and then you can monitor to see how the leaves are doing. That's not too hard to do. The other factor is this orchid is prone to rot, as I mentioned. So you don't want to keep it soaking wet all the time. You want to make sure that it's in some media that you can get close to dry and then water again. Now, this is a thirsty orchid, but it does need good drainage. So I have this in 100% sphagnum moss, and I dry it as it's approaching dryness, and it's pretty fluffy in there. But as a safe bet, you could put it in like 50-50 bark and sphagnum moss. That'll promote good drainage, but also make sure that you have good moisture in there. So that's something that you can consider as a beginner. The blooms on this orchid last 3 to 4 weeks, which is really nice. So it takes forever to bloom. These spikes, as I mentioned, once I start seeing the first little trace of a spike, it can take like 6 months for it to fully come out, which is crazy to me. This takes forever. I mean, this is probably the longest forming orchid. This is probably the orchid that takes the longest for me to grow. It really tests my patience, but once it's open, the blooms last 3 to 4 weeks. This one right here, my cat who's laying down right next to me, she loves to eat the flowers, so I keep it away from her. But they're little and cute. Can you blame her? As I said, this orchid blooms one time per year fully. So I get a huge show in the winter. And then in the spring and summer, I get rogue spikes. So like one spike here or two spikes there. So one big show and then one little show later. So it blooms twice a year for me, one being the biggest show. As I said, this orchid is very vigorous. It can double and triple in size for you, no problem. I had just a few bulbs. This was a division from my mom's plant. I had like 2 or 3 bulbs, and now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe a dozen bulbs in here. So this, if you get an orchid, if you get an Oncidium Twinkle, just know that it's very vigorous. I highly recommend this orchid for beginners. Just take the precautions that I mentioned at the end about not overwatering. Don't give it light that's extremely bright. You could just monitor the leaves to see if it's going to work for you well or not, and you'll be in good shape with this orchid. Let me know down below if you have different twinkles. There are different kinds of twinkles. This one is the Siku Marguerite. There is the Oro version, which is yellow. There are some pink versions. There's some red versions. There's so many different kinds. I do find that the fragrance is very similar. They're pretty much the same. They're just different variations of the color. So there's lots out there. I encourage you to give it a try if you're a beginner grower. If you have one, let me know down below. Let me know your thoughts on this orchid, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, everyone.